Have you ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, where Russell Crowe imagines his roommate and a little girl? He eventually learns to just sort of ignore them. It's scary how true that is. Seeing that movie was a turning point for me. I realized I could maybe learn to live a normal life, and for an 11-year-old who'd been to 100 doctors, admitted to 3 mental hospitals, and tried every antipsychotic it was safe to give an 11-year-old, and a few that weren't. Thanks, Dad. That was more hope than I'd ever had before. Ever since I was born, I'd see things wandering around. I remember seeing them before I remember my own parents' faces. They ignored me, and I could never touch them. But, that's what most adults seem like to an infant. So why was it strange? It's all pretty fuzzy that far back. No one remembers being a baby, but they've always just been there. About the time I turned 3, I think I realized no one else could see them but me. That's when my parents tell me I started having imaginary friends. I'd talk about big animals I'd see, and they'd smile and humor me. If the animal I described had a few too many eyes and teeth, well, that's the imagination of a child, right? It wasn't until I was a little older that I started to worry. I was past the "it's cute" stage, and they started looking at my drawings with concern. I'd become obsessed with drawing the creatures no one else could see. For a kid, I think I was pretty good too. That was the problem. They really didn't like what they saw in my drawings. I remember very vividly my mother grabbing one in particular I'd finished, and I was so happy I got it exactly right. She looked down at the purplish gray blob, the appendages that didn't match the body, and the face that looked simply wrong to her. She held it up to me, angry tears running down her cheeks, screaming at me to never draw something like that again, before ripping it up and sending me to my room. I stopped showing them my pictures after that, though I had a serious collection by the time I was 6. That's when they sent me to the first psychiatrist. We talked for a couple of hours, then once a week for about a month and a half. It was so exciting having an adult who listened to me about the creatures, one that didn't get angry or leave the room or shut the door a few minutes later. So I was pretty upset the day she asked me if I knew the animals weren't real. I stopped talking to her altogether after that. The next 3 doctors lasted even less time. By the time I was 7, though, we found Dr. Thompson. She was amazing. She didn't seem to care if the creatures were real or not, just that I was able to live life without being unstable because of them. I talked to her for 6 months. My parents were so much happier, and I thought everything was going to be okay. In that way, a child doesn't think about the future. One day, Dr. Thompson asked if I wanted to show her my drawings. That night I went home and pulled out the boxes of the drawings from under my bed and my closet. For the next week I combed through them all, picking the very best ones. I was so excited to finally share them with someone who I trusted and who wouldn't react to them. The next Tuesday, I pulled them out of my backpack and happily handed them over to Dr. Thompson. She stared at them for a long time, flipping through the stack slowly. Eventually, she looked at me and smiled, asking if she could keep these for a little while. I said yes. I trusted her so much, what had I to fear? We talked about school for the rest of the session. As we left, she asked me to wait in the playroom and had my parents step into her office. I was sure she was telling them I was okay and that there was nothing wrong with me or my drawings. My parents came out a few minutes later, and I knew something was wrong. My father looked worried, and my mom, she picked me up and held me close, telling me she loved me. That night, we packed a suitcase, and my parents told me that there was a place Dr. Thompson thought I should visit for a little while. The way they described it, it sounded like a summer camp, which I'd always wanted to try. So when I got into the car, I was eager to get there. But I think you know it wasn't a camp. The hospital wasn't like what you see in the movies. No white paint with fluorescent lights. There were bright primary colors everywhere, and paintings of cartoon elephants and dogs and other animals, and the staff wore uniforms with flowers and clowns on them. I was left in the playroom under the careful watch of a kindly nurse who talked to me while I colored, a purple cat at the time. I knew better than to draw them in front of other people by now. After a while, maybe an hour I think, my parents came back with a man in a white coat over a green shirt and glasses. I remember thinking at the time that his hair matched the brown of his tie. They introduced him and said that I'd be staying here with him and some of the other children. I was quiet, and I asked them if I could please go home instead. Mom started tearing up a little and turned away. Dad knelt down and gruffly told me that this was for the best and they'd visit me all the time. I tried not to cry, shocked as they hugged and kissed my head, telling me how much they loved me. Loved me. Then they left, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. The nurse, whose name I learned was Tina, held me and rocked me back and forth until I stopped, then carried me to a room with a small bed and a cubby for my suitcase. She lay me on the bed and asked if I was hungry. I shook my head, saying I was just tired, so she sat down in a chair in the corner of the room, while I lay there still sniffing a little, and fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of the door opening, and Tina coming in with a tray of food. She said it was dinner time and I needed to eat. Before I could touch the food though, she gave me a little cup of some strangely bright pills and told me I had to take them. I was still emotionally and physically drained, and I did so without questioning. I quietly ate my dinner after that and went back to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke again and saw Tina dozing in her chair, a book hanging from her limp fingers. I watched her for a long time, then went to my suitcase and began drawing the creature that was sleeping next to her. I put it under my mattress when I finished and returned to my dreams. The next day I met the man with the coat and glasses. We talked for a while in his office, and by now I was used to the questions new doctors asked to know what answers he wanted. It was a week before my parents came to visit me. I didn't talk to them. I was too angry. Then they were leaving, and I began sobbing, begging them to take me home. Tina had to pull me off of them and hold me tight as I fought her before they left. I hated that place. It was a year before I left the hospital. They tried every medicine they could on me, but nothing stopped me seeing the things. Eventually, I learned to pretend I was okay when they tried a combination of pills that didn't leave me feeling sick or sleepy. I kept it up for a long time, and finally they told me I could go home. Mom and Dad were happy to have me back, and normal finally. I was just glad to be out of there. The next few years were turbulent though. Eventually they realized I was faking, and the doctors started the meds again. Then they found some of the pictures, and when I was 10, I was sent to another hospital. That one did not last too long. The doctors there were pretty arrogant, and he was convinced I was cured within a few weeks. My parents were more skeptical than ever now, and less than a year later I was in another facility, this time one that wasn't just for kids. It was there I met Paul. Paul was an orderly, but he was probably the nicest person I have ever met, and the only reason I am still not in some room drugged up. He was the one who snuck in the movie and explained that sometimes you just have to ignore the things no one else can see. To this day, I don't know why he took the risk and gave me that very unprofessional advice, but I'll be forever grateful for it. That was when I finally learned what I had to do to stay out of places like that forever. I was able to go to a new middle school, and my art teacher loved me. I had a lot of practice after all, and never showed her the pictures I did in my free time, of course. I went through high school drawing, and eventually painting, making friends, dating. It was as close to happy as I'd been in a long time when Lauren came into my life. She loved my art, and we spent hours together talking about colors and shapes. My first girlfriend. My parents were thrilled, naturally. They took this as a sign I really was going to be okay. But we broke up a few months later when she found a piece I was working on, one of the ones I never meant to show anyone. She told me she didn't like things that lurked in the mind. That pretty much sums up my life through college. I got an art scholarship and eventually found an outlet I could share a few of the tamer pieces I'd previously hidden. Most people found them disturbing, but a few people thought that they were awesome. I even sold one to a heavy metal band for their album cover. I still paint and even have a few exhibitions now and then. Most of my income comes from commissions. Thanks, Reddit. I'd largely put everything behind me until one day, a few weeks ago. I hadn't mentioned them to anyone in years. I hadn't even shown anyone a painting of one since college. I was at a park, painting, enjoying the sun and doing a few sketches for some side cash and tips. It was nice. Around lunchtime, I grabbed a pita from a vendor nearby and a bottle of water, taking a spot under a tree to enjoy the shade. Then I saw one of them drinking from the fountain. I watched it for a while, standing up and stretching. Then I caught sight of something that made me freeze. There was a man, just some old man in a suit and hat, staring at it. And it looked like he was staring at it. He had a little book in his lap and a pencil in one hand. Heat rising in my chest, heart pounding, I walked towards him. I sat on the bench next to him and tried to catch a look at the page that he was scribbling on. Sure enough, it was there. He was drawing it. A numb serenity washed over me, and I caught his eye. He raised an eyebrow. I worked my tongue for a minute, testing my words, forming a question I wasn't sure how to ask. Finally, it came out. Do you know what they are? He stared at me a moment, studying me with a furrowed brow. Eventually, he smiled sadly and shrugged. For all I know, they're just in my head. My neighbor brought over some baby shoes the other day. They were pink and had glitter on the toes and sequined flowers on the sides. We cooed over them for a few minutes, and I told her how much I appreciated the gift. After she left, I threw them in my bedroom closet with all the other baby junk I've been given over the past 6 months. 6 months ago, everyone in town started to ask about my baby. I do not have a baby. I have never given birth or even been pregnant. I thought that I was being mistaken for someone else. I'm not particularly unique looking. Maybe some other short, dark-haired and hazel-eyed girl gave birth recently. But I am shy by nature and southern by birth, so I was too polite to say, "You're wrong. You have the wrong person. I don't have a baby." I said things like, "Oh, okay," mostly because it must have been a case of mistaken identity. People brought over baby clothes, a crib, a swing that plugs into the wall and jiggles, toys and shoes and diapers. A very weird situation to be in for sure. But then, to put it plainly, things got weirder. I was in a grocery store, and the manager, a friendly old man, came up to me and asked about my sweet little girl. He asked if she would like the different formula he had suggested, and if I wanted more. I just smiled. When I got home, I found a formula in my grocery bags and an almost empty can in my cabinet. I didn't even remember putting it in my cart. The thing is, everyone has been so nice to me, and the situation is just so odd that I started to go along with it. "How's the little darling today?" a neighbor would ask when I went to get the mail. "Oh, she's wonderful, sleeping through the night," I'd answer. Then a young woman that got coffee at the same place as me asked about a play date with her 9-month-old and my then 5-month-old. I sort of blew it off. Next time I saw her, though, she talked about setting up another play date and how much fun our two darlings had. She showed me a picture on her phone. "Aren't they just precious in this picture? Your little girl has the most beautiful blue eyes. Her dress really makes them pop. I'll text this to you." I looked at the picture and saw a chubby baby in a red shirt and blue shorts. It had dark hair and dark eyes. It was the only baby in the picture. I went home and opened my bedroom closet full of baby junk. I pulled out teddy bears and an unopened box with a changing table in it. I pulled out a shopping bag with a few baby clothes. I dumped it out on my bed and looked through them. I found a light blue dress. A few weeks ago, I decided to call my mom.
"Hello?"
She answered.
"Mom, it's me."
I said.
"Oh, Pearl, hi. How are you?"
I asked. We don't talk often.
"I'm good. We're all good out here."
She paused, then asked,
"How are you two doing?" "Us two?"
I asked, hesitantly.
Now, don't act like that. I know I haven't been in touch, but I do care about you and my grandbaby,"
she said sourly.
I know, Mom. She's crying. I got to go."
I lied.
"Give Holly my love,"
she said, and then hung up before I did. The funny thing is, Breakfast at Tiffany's has been my favorite book since I was a kid. I'd always thought Holly would be a great name for a kid I would eventually have. I went into my room to put my phone down after my short conversation with my mom. The changing table and the crib were neatly set up by the window. I didn't do that. I'm sure I didn't. I walked over to the crib and looked inside. Nothing was there. I walked over to the changing table, then took a step back before I bumped my shin against one of the legs, because I remembered that I had done that before. I looked down and saw a bruise on my skin. I know I hit it against the changing table, but I also know that they weren't in here before. I know it.
"How's Holly today?"
my neighbor across the street asked. We were both out grabbing our mail.
"She's good. Happy as ever,"
I said.
"I heard her screaming up a storm when you came home last night. I'd be surprised if you were able to get her to bed at all." "Once she lays down, it usually doesn't take too long,"
I replied. I went inside and looked through my mail. A bunch of junk,
a few red envelopes. I put everything down on the kitchen table and opened a cabinet to get out a cup. I heard some noises coming from my room. I paused and listened. I didn't hear anything for a minute, so I grabbed the cup and got some water from the sink. I heard something over the sound of the tap. Holly must be awake. I went into my room and looked down in the crib. Holly's stuffed elephant was in the crib. I reached down and picked it up. It was cute. No wonder someone got that for Holly. I put the elephant back down in the crib and brought the cup to my mouth to take a sip. I realized I was holding a baby bottle. Mom brain, I thought. Where did I put that cup down? But then I saw I was holding my cup. I'm not a mom. What the hell was I just thinking? I looked back over the crib. Why do I still have this crap in my room? I kicked the crib. Then I kicked it again. Then again, until the wood began to splinter. I pushed the changing table over to the side. I opened my closet and shoved in the pieces of the crib and any other baby-related item I could find. I slammed the door closed. I can't keep this charade up, I decided. I can't go along with this nonsense anymore. I went to get coffee this morning. I was so tired. I felt like I hadn't slept all night. The barista smiled at me.
Your kid keep you up?
She asked. No, I said firmly. Her smile wavered. I sat down at a table to drink my coffee. Some woman walked up to me. She asked how I was doing, how my daughter was doing.
I'm fine,
I answered, and left it at that. She sat down at the table, and in a hushed and concerned voice, she asked me if I was experiencing any depression. She said that new mothers often feel like this.
I'm not a new mother,
I said. A man came in and walked quickly up to the table. He bent down and whispered something in my ear. It didn't register at first.
What?
I asked.
You left your kid in her car seat, in her car,
he said again. I jumped up and ran outside. I unlocked my car and opened the back seat. How could I be so stupid? How screwed up am I to leave my kid in the car? But nothing was there. No kid, no car seat. I drove home. I sat on my bed and looked through the pictures on my phone. I looked at the picture of the chubby kid in the red shirt. I stared at it. Where is she? Where is Holly? There's only one kid in this picture, but everyone else says there are two. Chubbs and my little Holly, bright blue eyes, blue dress. She does look so pretty in that blue dress. I do have a bit more to write, but Holly just started to cry. I need to go check on her.
When the last days were upon me, and the ugly trifles of existence began to drive me to madness, like the small drops of water that torturers let fall ceaselessly upon one spot of the victim's body, I loved the irradiate refuge of sleep. In my dreams, I found a little of the beauty I had vainly sought in life, and wandered through old gardens and enchanted woods. Once when the wind was soft and scented, I heard the south calling, and sailed endlessly and languorously under strange stars. Once, when the gentle rain fell, I glided in a barge down a sunless stream under the earth till I reached another world of purple twilight, iridescent arbors, and undying roses. And once, I walked through a golden valley that led to shadowy groves and ruins, and ended in a mighty wall, green with antique vines and pierced with a little gate of bronze. Many times I walked through that valley, and longer would I pause in the spectral half-light where the giant trees squirmed and twisted grotesquely, and the grey ground stretched damply from trunk to trunk, sometimes disclosing the mold-stained stones of buried temples. And always the goal of my fancies was the mighty vine-grown wall with the little gate of bronze therein. After a while, as the days of walking became less and less bearable from their grayness and sameness, I would often drift into opiate peace through the valley and the shadowy groves, and wonder how I might seize them for my eternal dwelling place, so that I need no more crawl back to a dull world stripped of interest and new colors. And as I looked upon the little gate in the mighty wall, I felt that beyond it lay a dream country from which, once it was entered, there would be no return. So, each night in sleep, I strove to find the hidden latch of the gate in the ivied wall, though it was exceedingly well hidden. And I would tell myself that the realm beyond the wall was not more lasting merely, but more lovely and radiant as well. Then one night in the dream city of Zakarian, I found a yellowed papyrus filled with the thoughts of dream sages who dwelt of old in that city, and who were too wise ever to be born in the waking world. Therein were written many things concerning the world of dream, and among them was lore of a golden valley, and a sacred grove with temples, and a high wall pierced by a little bronze gate. When I saw this lore, I knew that it touched on the scenes I had haunted, and I therefore read long in the yellowed papyrus. Some of the dream sages wrote gorgeously of the wonders beyond the irrepassable gate, but others told of horror and disappointment. I knew not which to believe, yet longed more and more to cross forever into the unknown land, for doubt and secrecy are the lure of lures, and no new horror can be more terrible than the daily torture of the commonplace. So when I learned of the drug which would unlock the gate and drive me through, I resolved to take it when next I awaked. Last night I swallowed the drug and floated dreamily into the golden valley and the shadowy groves. And when I came this time to the antique wall, I saw the small gate of bronze was ajar. From beyond came a glow that weirdly lit the giant twisted trees and the tops of the buried temples, and I drifted on songfully, expectant of the glories of the land from whence I should never return. But as the gate swung wider, and the sorcery of the drug and dream pushed me through, I knew that all sights and glories were at an end. For in that new realm was neither land nor sea, but only the white void of unpeopled and illimitable space. So, happier than I had ever dared hope to be, I dissolved again into that native infinity of crystal oblivion, from which the demon life had called me for one brief and desolate hour.
It was weird. One day I was an only child. The next, I had an older brother. My parents didn't even warn me. Just one day he arrived and took my room, and I had to sleep in the basement. He arrived in a large, waxed raincoat. I remember the water droplets that hung to its surface as he leaned over me and offered his hand. I ran behind my mother's legs and stayed there. He smiled back. My mother apologized for me, and that was that. It was obvious after a few days that he was their favorite. I had a lot of issues, and I knew I was a disappointment to them. I visited a therapist twice a week, though I didn't talk much. I never did. I think that was my main problem. I was fine. My parents thought otherwise. One day, my new brother came downstairs and handed me a used painting set and canvases. I ignored him, upset that he usurped me. He didn't say anything, instead set up the easel and began to paint. He was incredible. I watched in awe as within minutes he had painted things I couldn't imagine were possible from a paintbrush. He finished with painting a door. It looked familiar, but I wasn't sure. He sat down the paints and walked back upstairs. I stared at it for weeks. Then, one day, I decided to try for myself. At first I was terrible, but as the months rolled on, I got better and better. I still didn't have the confidence to speak to my brother, but every now and then he'd make his way into the basement and look at what I'd painted. He'd stare at them with nostalgia in his eyes. He would cry. I, though, hid behind the sofa, watching him mentally critique my work. "Keep it up," he said in a hushed tone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a warm glow around me, something I'd not felt before. So I continued to paint. By the time I was a teenager, my brother was around less and less, but my painting was as good as what his was when he first showed me. I really wanted him to see what I'd created. It was all because of him, after all. I waited one day in the living room. I stole glances out of the window, waiting for him to come home. When he did, I jumped out of my chair and ran to the door to greet him. He stepped back, as if not wanting to embrace me. "Look at what I painted," I said to him. My parents appeared surprised. Even though I was 16, I rarely spoke. I ran to the basement door. "I think you should follow him," my mother said to my brother. I waited for what seemed like hours until my brother walked downstairs. I could barely see his face under the hood of his waxed jacket. "What do you think?" I offered. He stepped into the light, examining the painting. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I put my hand to my mouth. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, and began to cry. Upset, I raced over to him and hugged him. "Thank you for teaching me," I said. I then felt his body sway. I tried to hold on to him, but my grasp wasn't strong enough. He collapsed, hitting his head on the side of my desk and onto the floor. The following months were the worst of my life. My brother was dead. With my mental history, I was sent to a psychiatric hospital. They said I had an episode and tried to kill my brother. I didn't. I swear. He fell. They said it may have been a side effect of the medication I was on, or my psychosis in general. After many sessions with the in-house psychiatrist, I was allowed to access the painting material. To be honest, it wasn't that bad. I saw my parents once a week, and I was able to paint. I thought about my brother a lot. I thought about the painting he did for me, the one of the door. I tried my best to remember it, and over I tried to paint it. Each time I stood back and looked at it. Something wasn't right, and I never knew what, until one day I got it spot on. That's when I realized what it was of. It was the front door of our house. Seeing it in front of me, it was so obvious. I peered at it from different angles. I remembered it all. I started to paint in all the details. The room began to get cold, so I put on my jacket. I placed the paints in my pocket when I was done and gazed in awe. It was almost real. I stared and cried. I wasn't going to see this front door for a long time, if ever. That frightened me. The longer I gazed, the more I wished I could just be standing outside it, knocking on it, waiting for my parents to answer. I pretended I was standing outside. For the first time in months, I felt free. I imagined the wind blowing as the rains fell. I imagined reaching out to turn the handle. I closed my eyes and reached. I could feel the rain on my forehead. I could feel the cool air. I could hear the water slap against my jacket. I opened my eyes. I was there, outside my parents' house. I panicked briefly before, almost on autopilot, walking towards the door. I knocked. I felt I must be dreaming. Then the door opened. My mother stood there.
"Can I help you?"
she asked.
"Mum, it's your son."
She tried to close the door. I placed my foot in the way.
"Please, just listen to me." "Come on in,"
she said. She looked into my eyes. There was a recognition in them. She knew I was truthful.
"Come on in,"
she said, confused. I saw a little boy in the living room. I knelt down to talk to him. He ran behind his mother's legs. I smiled, remembering doing that myself. I tapped my pocket, feeling the painting set in there. I knew what I needed to do.